Simon Dyall is an associate professor at the University of Roehampton. His work sits at the interface of neuroscience, nutrition, neurobiology, and psychology. Simon studies bioactive lipids, omega-3 fatty acids, lipid mediators, perinatal health, cognition, brain health across the lifespan. Simon, your work helps us understand the biology. You bring the modern neuroscience of DPA, DHA, EPA, arachidonic acid, and lipid signaling into this conversation. From a neuroscience perspective, why are DHA and EPA and arachidonic acid so important during pregnancy, fetal development, and early life?
Well, thank you, Rachel. Thanks for the invitation and chance to talk today. It's been a pleasure to hear Michael's preliminary chats and his life story. And I'm kind of leading on for this and developing some of the concepts. So the question is, why are DHA and EPA and arachidonic acid so important for brain development? And we have an understanding of this thanks to Michael's seminal Lancet paper in 1976, where he developed the concept of biomagnification and bioreduction. So the placenta has specialized processes for enriching the arachidonic acid and the DHA across to the fetus. So the fetus has a specific requirement for DHA, for arachidonic acid during its development. And we now have an understanding of why this is so important. So there's different processes that happen across the fetal brain development. So in the early stages, you have the production of new neurons, a process called neurogenesis, and then these need to migrate to where they integrate into the existing architecture, and then they form synapses and they communicate with each other. And DHA has been shown to be essential for all of these processes, for the production of new neurons, for the production of synapses, which are the communication points between neurons, also in terms of the migration, synaptic pruning. Sophie Lay did some beautiful work looking at maternal deficiency of these fatty acids and how this alters synaptic pruning. And altered synaptic pruning has been shown to be a feature of neurodevelopmental disorders, schizophrenia, autism may be related to altered synaptic pruning. So these fatty acids have a structural role in the cell membrane, but they also have a functional role in terms of regulating what goes on. Arachidonic acid tends to get a little bit forgotten, but it's very important for the cardiovascular function, for what's called orgogenesis, so the formation of new organs, the immune system development, and they're involved in gene expression. So to answer your question, they're involved in everything. Yes. Every single process involves these particular fatty acids. So they're master regulators of neurodevelopment.
Yeah, so DHA is also described as a neuroprotectant, correct?
So
what does that mean?
So what we've looked at is we've looked at how the brain is protected.
Yeah.
So part of my work is in neurotrauma, looking at how these compounds protect the brain from injury. So neuroprotection is the protection of neurons, but a lot of this is done by other specialized cells, such as microglial cells and astrocytes. And we haven't really talked about EPA much today. No. So EPA is found at very, very low levels in the brain, but it is quite enriched in microglial cells, which are the brain's resident immune cells. So DHA allied with EPA and arachidonic acid are important for protecting neurons, protecting their development. We know that they have important roles in oligodendrocytes, which are involved in white matter formation, which is the communication between neurons. So DHA has important roles in the membrane, has important roles for helping the membrane structure, but they're also precursors to a wide range of bioactive lipid mediators. And it's these mediators that may be involved in the actual protection, so the neuroprotective processes.
So you're also an expert in healthy aging, which is incredibly popular at the moment. You know, everyone wants to live longer. We all want to know what is going to facilitate longevity, but we want a longer, healthier life. We want mobility. We want cognitive function. So what role does nutrition play, would you say, in supporting brain health as we age?
That's a great question. So the big thing now is about health span. So rather than lifespan, it's about health span. We want to preserve our brain function.
Yes.
So this growing awareness, there's this the medical field, there's lifestyle medicine. So lifestyle medicine, you're looking at sleep, you're looking at social communication, social interaction, all these features, nutrition, but it's not getting the prominence that it should.
Yes.
There's a good body of evidence from observational studies that the populations that eat more fish, they tend to suffer less from dementia and Alzheimer's disease, lower risk of these things. So populations that have a higher fish intake, it's consistently been shown they have lower risk for dementia. The Framingham studies, so that the Framingham is a cohort in America that were originally studied for cardiovascular disease. And there's great work showing there that the higher blood levels of DHA was associated with a significantly decreased risk for dementia. And this has been shown in the second generation and the third generation. So multi-generationally, it's been shown that higher fish intake decreases the risk for dementia by several years. Obviously, fish contains omega-3s, but it contains other nutrients such as iodine and et cetera, et cetera. So the issue has been how we translate that to RCTs. How do we translate the observational studies to studies by identifying which fatty acid, which dose, how long do you need to take it for? And that's been a complication of the field, is trying to simplify the complexity of observational studies into a randomized controlled trial. And we recently published a big review looking at the limitations of RCTs and why we're getting mixed messages. There's a great study, the lipid diet studies, which gave a supplement called Suvinade, which contains omega-3s, it contains phospholipids, it contains B vitamins, everything that's required for phospholipid synthesis. And they looked at a very large cohort over 2 years, and they found protection in terms of brain volume, but not in terms of cognition. The placebo group didn't have the expected decline over 2 years, but they extended it for 3 years, and they found significant improvements in cognition at 3 years. So one of the problems we have with RCTs is they're typically done over a very short period, 6 months, 8 months, a year. And we have to remember, what are we expecting omega-3s to do? Are we expecting them to improve cognition? Are we expecting them to prevent the decline? And if we're expecting them to prevent the decline, we need to have sufficient time to see that decline in the placebo group. And I think that's one of the problems with the trials, is we're just not looking long enough to see what they're expecting. And also we need to consider the cofactors. So if we're looking at phospholipid synthesis, we need the B vitamins, the B12, the B6s, etc. If we're in terms of inflammation, we may need to consider antioxidants and these kind of factors. We need to consider, as Michael mentioned earlier, the micronutrients as well. So it's the reductionist approach of RCTs aren't well focused for omega-3 trials, but what we're doing is we're starting to have a greater understanding of the conditions where they are most effective. So they're most effective at a certain dose with these other nutrients when you're starting with a lower baseline level, the genetic background that you have, all of these factors. So we know that eating fish protects the brain. It's now translating that into what dose of omega-3s and duration, etc.
Absolutely. So from a personal perspective, my father sadly passed away from Alzheimer's. Many people are now wondering through a new lens of recognizing that it's never a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to brain health, and that indeed, nutrition works synergistically with lifestyle factors such as exercise. There's a lot of talk as to whether or not conditions like dementia can be prevented or significantly delayed. So just to give you a case study example, talking about my father again, his father died of Alzheimer's when he was just 60. My father, through my own research and working with, you all, started taking omega-3 and increased his consumption of fish and seafood. He did develop dementia and later Alzheimer's, but he passed away at 83. Now that was a 2-decade increase in terms of his lifespan. DNA is not our destiny necessarily in terms of, how it used to be thought of as the blueprint for everything. What do you think's happening here?
Thank you for
Yeah.
that. Obviously, sorry to hear about your father.
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, there's two forms of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
There's early onset and late onset.
Yeah.
So the early onset is the much less common, around 5 to 10% is early onset. The late onset or sporadic Alzheimer's is much more common. So with early onset, it's heritable. So there are certain genes that predispose you for it. Whereas late onset, there are genes that are risk factors for it. So the most common risk factor is something called ApoE4.
Yeah.
So the ApoE4 significantly increases your risk for dementia. So in any population, it's around 12%, but in an Alzheimer's population, it's found at a much higher rate. We know that ApoE has an altered lipid metabolism. It has an altered half-life for DHA. And thanks to Melanie Plaud's great work, we know that it has alterations in terms of getting into the brain. So what you need to do is that when you start to show the overt symptoms of Alzheimer's, like memory loss, confusion, etc., it's very late in the trajectory of the disease. You may have had it for 10, 20 years before that. So trying to take it like a little nutrient capsule to have any effect when you've got significant neuronal loss is problematic.
Yeah.
So you need to start earlier. You need to start in your 30s, 30s or 40s, 50s and 60s. So it's about starting early to give the nutrients time to get in. And we know that with ApoE4, you get an altered response. And it may be more effective if you're an ApoE4 carrier to start earlier rather than later, because ApoE4 essentially increases the speed and the trajectory of the decline. So what you need to do is you need to start the nutrient intake before that. So what I would suggest is you need to consider the genetic background, you need to consider those risk factors, you need to consider family history, family profile, but it's never too early to start taking it, start taking DHA, EPA mix. We don't really know whether it needs to be DHA and EPA or EPA versus DHA with aging. So just take more fish is a good place to start. Take the DHA as a supplement with it. So start to take it sooner rather than later. Thanks to Richard Bazinet's great work, we now know that high levels of DHA may actually inhibit the conversion of lower chains to later chains, so that you're going to increase your EPA levels by taking DHA. So these factors. So genetic background, start taking it before you show the signs of memory loss to have maximum effect. And consider wider nutrients. So with aging, you need to think about B vitamins, etc., to help with incorporation of DHA into membranes, because with aging, you get a decrease in phospholipids, so the effects are maybe more related to structural things. So B vitamins, B12, B6, and other factors are important.
This is really valuable information. Thank you for sharing it. And why is this information not public knowledge? Why are we not doing more in terms of preventative health? And that's opened up to everyone. But I'd like to hear your thoughts first.
We are doing our best. Yes. We are doing our best to raise awareness, thanks to Alex's great work with FAB and webinars. It's getting the information across, so that I'm part of a special interest group with the Nutrition Society on nutritional psychology or nutritional psychiatry. So we're trying to raise awareness, but you've got to think, where do people get their information from? Do they get it from GPs? In which case, GPs get an incredibly limited amount of information about nutrition. Are they getting it from nutritionists, dietitians? So it's about raising awareness, and it is complex. I study nothing but omega-3 fats. I've been studying it for 20 plus years, and I'm still learning. I'm still trying to integrate the information, still trying to get it. So it's getting the information. The Lancet has started doing some nice preventative kind of work in various areas, but it's getting the information to the right places. A lot of the medical profession take their information from meta-analysis, like the Cochrane Review. The Cochrane Review is the kind of resource. It's like, unless it's in the Cochrane, it doesn't count. And meta-analyses are very bad at pooling information from RCTs. And RCTs are very bad for assessing the efficacy of omega-3s. So I think it's taking time. Michael's obviously been working in this field for a long time, and it's about getting the information across to the clinicians, getting information across to the public, and we are getting there. There is, I think, a groundswell in nutritional psychiatry in terms of the importance of nutrition, and obviously, podcasts like this and the great work that you're doing, we're working in our various arenas to get the information across, but it takes time. And I think we just do what we can, and eventually we'll reach a critical mass and people will start to appreciate the awareness, hopefully.
Yes. And how has Michael's work inspired your own work? When did you first meet?
That's a great question. So just earlier, so when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I've had a very mixed career, and I didn't do my undergraduate degree till very late. And Michael's book, Nutrition and Evolution, so I did my degree at Sussex University, which has a very strong evolutionary history.
Yes.
And Michael's book was great for having great discussions and getting everyone kind of up in arms about the importance of diet, etc. So,
and what year was that?
So I started my degree in 1999. So I did my degree was in biochemistry, but we had the first year we had a couple of courses on evolution, and Michael's book got me through those courses on evolution, and he kindly signed the book for me just now,
which is wonderful,
which is really kind. And then I did a PhD in omega-3 fats with Professor Adina Michael Titus, and we worked at Queen Mary. So it's Queen Mary had no background in lipids. We had no contacts in the lipid world. We didn't know anyone in the lipid world. We were just kind of starting on some fats, and I was trying to measure them. And the Brighton ISFAL conference for I think 2004, and we submitted our abstract to the Brighton ISFAL conference. And Michael kindly sent a letter saying, great work. You're working in a very similar arena. Would you like to meet and have a chat? And that was such a wonderful thing to have, a pioneer who's
incredible.
Who's papers I was citing, send me I've still got the letter at home. It's kind of
and he's get it framed.
And it was like such a welcome to the field, because Adina and I were going to this lipid conference. We didn't really know anyone, but Michael was there, and Michael was actually chairing the first session I spoke in, and Alex was speaking in the first session as well. And I did a 15-minute presentation in 6 minutes. I was so nervous. I was speaking really, really quickly, and Michael asked me my first question. So Michael has been a kind of.
Do you remember what that first question was?
Sadly, I don't. But Michael probably does.
No, I don't remember.
Michael was an inspiration before I met him. His research has obviously laid the foundation. We stand on the shoulders of science, of giants in Michael. So his work in infants, in biomagnification, in brain development. We recently published a paper on it this year. I've developed this concept to the PUFA gap of prematurity, which is again based on Michael's work on biomagnification and preterm infants not getting the nutrients that they would in utero. So he's kind of been a guiding force throughout, and he's been a great friend and a great colleague. And that was a really wonderful introduction to the field. And Tom Brenner always says that the lipid field is such a nice field because we all eat so much fish, and we're all just keeps us all happy and friendly.
We're all kind and have empathy. That's
exactly.
So lovely. It's so important. And Michael also warmly embraced me into his, circle of fatty acid researchers. In fact, that's how I know both you and Alex as well today. So just tell us, if you may, what are your students working on right now? What do you think is most important in terms of the next generation of scientists in order for them to progress and expand the work of DHA and its role in the human brain?
Thank you. It's a great question. For me, the most important thing that my students do is impact. It's getting the research out there. We already know a huge amount of what DHA does, and we haven't got the fine details, but we know how important it is. So it's getting impact. So one of my students, one of my real areas of interest is preterm infant nutrition. And preterm infants either get maternal milk, and if they can't get maternal milk, they get donor milk. So my focus now is to try and increase the endogenous levels of DHA and other nutrients in preterm infant nutrition. So I've got a PhD student, Corelli Feliz, who's working on developing guidelines for breast milk donors to increase their omega-3 intake. So we're validating these guidelines. So for those that don't know, donor human milk is a altruistic so it's given by mothers who have extra milk that then can be used for preterm infants.
That's wonderful.
But there are no specific nutritional guidelines for breast milk donors. So they can just generally eat healthily. But breast milk is highly responsive to dietary DHA intake. You eat more DHA, your breast milk levels go up massively. So it's trying to get that information across. So we've developed these guidelines and resources for breast milk donors that are equally applicable to anyone that's lactating. So the nutrients that are important to, I don't want to say optimize, but to increase the levels of the found in breast milk to therefore benefit the preemie infants. So that's one of the areas.
That's so important. That's music to my ears, because was it prior to 2002 and the work of Dr. Susan Colson, DHA wasn't even included in formula which was given to preterm infants. And in fact, the formula today, the alternative to obviously donor milk and is questionable, isn't it? What do you...
Formula is quite a complex thing.
Yeah.
So formula has a specific requirement for DHA. They've removed the requirement for arachidonic acid, which is a terrible thing. We did a study a little while ago measuring the fatty acid levels in formula and seeing what was there in there, what was supposed to be in there. And the levels were highly variable, even though they're supposed to be tightly regulated. There was levels of peroxidation. Formula doesn't contain many nutrients that are found in breast milk, such as human milk oligosaccharides, obviously beneficial bacteria, those kinds of things. So DHA is very important. Formula so if the preterm infants are recommended to have donor milk up until 32 weeks, and then after 32 weeks they're switched to formula because that's when the risk for a condition called necrotizing enterocolitis goes down. And there is a very unit-dependent focus on whether infants get formula or donor milk, because donor milk has low levels of fat, low levels of protein because of the processing.
Yes.
So formula. So there is no specific universal nutrition for preemie infants. The guidelines for preemie infants are very about body growth, and there are no specific guidelines less than 1,000 grams. It's about try and maximise body growth. If you increase body growth, then therefore the increase is survival. But there is no real focus on the importance of the brain-building nutrients. And Michael's been talking about this for years.
Yeah.
And so it is. And we're trying to do everything we can to raise awareness with clinicians of the importance of these fats above and beyond just body growth. You know, the brain obviously grows at the biggest rate in the last trimester. There's the maximum fat deposition in the last trimester, which in an incubator is a very different environment to in utero. So that's an area we're focusing on, is trying to bridge the gap between what they would have got in utero as to what they get in the incubator.
And that's so important. And also for the recognition from a public health perspective, I know the US Dietary Guidelines, for example, in 2015 published that DHA is an essential fat to protect the neurocognitive benefits of the unborn child. What are we doing here in the UK? What are we telling pregnant mothers in terms of their DHA intake during pregnancy and even before pregnancy?
One of the biggest issues I think we have is the way that DHA is classified. So I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the speakers was saying linoleic acid, alpha-linolenic, they're dietary essential fatty acids, everything else can be made from this. And I'm not sure that's really valid because they are metabolically essential because we can't make the long chain from the short chain, but it places overdue influence on the short-chain fatty acids. They're the dietary essential, and we can make the rest from it. And the efficiency of conversion, I know Richard Basnier and Adam Metherell have done lots of work looking at the rate of conversion may not be as bad as we originally said, but he works in the healthy brain. So looking at a healthy brain, which has about 3.7 grams of DHA, the uptake in a healthy brain is about 3.4 milligrams of DHA per day, which you could possibly meet from short-chain fatty acids. But in pregnancy, for the developing brain, in aging, you may have a very different profile. And I think it's about raising the importance that DHA is essential.
Yes.
The ALA and the linoleic, so alpha-linolenic and linoleic are called dietary essential, but they're metabolically essential. Do they do anything that the other fatty acids can't do? So we need to appreciate that the fatty acids are all different. Although they're part of the same pathway, DHA does a very, very different thing to EPA, which does a very, very different thing to stearidonic acid, which does a very different thing to DPA. So we need to think about the specific fatty acids, the time when they're taken, how do we take them, when do we take them, what do we take them with? So it's about the nuances. And I think the field is moving more towards precision and personalised medicine. What do you as an individual need, rather than what does an aggregate from an RCT vaguely need in terms of dose? So what is the particular fatty acid you need at that point in your life? In development, it'll be a very different fatty acid to mood disorders, where EPA may be more important, to neurotrauma, where DHA may be important, to brain aging. So we need to think of them, eat more fish, but if we're talking about supplements, what are we supplementing? What are we supplementing with? We need to know those nuances. And to answer your previous question about how do I get the information across, it's complex. You need to understand the nuances to get benefit. Otherwise, you'll get people saying, oh, I tried the omega-3s, they didn't work. I tried them for a couple of weeks, I didn't notice any difference, so I don't bother anymore. So, and that's the thing, is that did you take the right amount, the right dose, the right form for long enough? What are you expecting to change? And it's getting a realistic expectation about the time it takes nutritional factors to produce an effect.
Absolutely. And oftentimes, you mentioned earlier the biomagnification process, which is the preferential uptake of DHA, which depletes the mother's richest store, which is the brain. And there is some research suggesting that that leaves the mother vulnerable for postpartum depression. And I don't think that's really well known to the average household, that, you do have this biomagnification process during the last trimester where an adequate intake of DHA is absolutely essential. Most pregnant women are not measuring their omega-3 levels. They have no idea about the omega-3 index, for example. What can we do to communicate the potential risk of postpartum depression because of the declining DHA levels during pregnancy?
That's a great question. I'm going to come back on 2 points.
Okay.
So biomagnification is arachidonic acid as well as DHA. Because arachidonic acid is very important, and you get a kind of bio removal of linoleic acid and alpha-linolenic. So it's arachidonic acid and DHA.
Yes.
I'm going to come back to that. So Maria Mikides and Bob Gibson in Australia have done some phenomenal work raising the importance of omega-3s for early preterm birth.
Yes.
And they've now rolled this out to South Australia. So they have this test and treat. So they measure the omega-3 levels in early pregnancy. If the omega-3 levels are low, then you get supplementation. Amazing. And this affects the risk for early preterm birth. The knock-on effect of that is that it's also increasing the levels during pregnancy. So it's raising awareness, and it's raising fatty acid levels for those that are low. So it has the benefit of decreasing the risk for early preterm birth, but also improves the profile of the mothers. And so they're doing this in South Australia. Susan Carlson in Kansas has done a few great studies in there. The ADORE trials have looked at that as well, looking at different populations. So it appears that black population have a greater risk in this as well. And I've recently contacted Maria Mikides and Bob Gibson, and we're looking to raise funds to try and incorporate this into the UK, try and do this into the UK and use the lessons they've taken. So this would have a knock-on benefit for decreasing risk for postpartum depression, particularly because you've mentioned the biomagnification, but also the breast milk has high levels of DHA, which is going to deplete the mother. So if you've had tandem pregnancies, if you've got pregnancies close together, if you've got twins, you're expressing more milk, this is going to deplete your levels. So there's all of these areas tie together. So there's risk of early preterm birth, postpartum depression, risk of that. There's the health of the neonate across these processes, all tie in to eat more fish, eat more fish in pregnancy, eat more fish in pregnancy. And Alex and others doing work looking at trying to what information are we giving during pregnancy if we're saying avoid oily fish, don't have fish more than twice a week, because of risk of mercury or PCBs. So this creates an artificial fear of fish that kind of throws in the mix that we're trying to say. So in our dietary guidelines for breast milk donors, we wanted to say eat lots of fish, have lots of fish, take supplements, but eat lots of fish. But then we're constrained by recommendations to say that don't eat more than 2 portions of oily fish per week. So we know the benefit. We know that the areas that are at greatest chance to improve with higher intakes of these, so risk of early preterm birth, we know that postpartum depression may well be related to this as a risk factor. And so it's about getting a message across in the constraints that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to ask your personal and perhaps professional opinion in terms of eating more fish and seafood. So I have noticed personally as well that when I go shopping for my weekly shop, wild fish is hard to come by. So wild or farmed, is there a difference? What are your thoughts?
Big question.
Yeah, big question.
So farm fish in the UK tends to be things like salmon. Salmon tends to be farmed. So if you go to Sainsbury's, for example, you can see the wild salmon. It's deep red colour. Farmed salmon tends to be a paler red colour. So this question was raised at the last ISFAL in terms of and the GOED conference. So the GOED talk. So this is the global organisation for DHA and EPA research. So it's the trade organisation. And the question was, so what about farmed salmon? What about farmed fish? Do they have the right nutrients in them?
Important question.
It's a very important question because most people get their fish from farms. They try and eat more fish, but it tends to be farmed. So it provides some.
Yes.
It doesn't provide probably the same overall matrix that wild fish has, but anything is better than none. So people obviously need to think about costs. Cost of living is very expensive. So rather than not having it, because it's not the ideal, it's better than nothing. Okay. So anything you have is better than nothing. So eating more fish generally, even if it hasn't got the best optimal levels of omega-3s, it's got the iodine, it's got magnesium, it's got these accessory nutrients. And the other thing that you need to consider is if you're eating more fish, it's displacing something else from the diet. So it may be displacing your pork sausages, it may be displacing your other things. So it may not be the optimum, but it's better than the alternative. It provides some nutrients. If you're worried at particular stages like pregnancy or have a supplement. Dietary supplements are there for a reason. Yes. So look at the range, but anything is better than nothing.
Yes. Great. Okay. So Dr. Alex Richardson is the founder, director of Food and Behaviour Research. Her work, her pioneering work, focuses on nutrition, fatty acids, behaviour, learning, mood and brain health or mental health. Alex has conducted some of the early randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials on omega-3 fatty acids in children from mainstream school who may be underachieving and who have diagnoses of dyspraxia, developmental coordination disorder. You've also worked in children with dyslexia, ADHD. Today, I would love to talk to you, Alex, about your current campaign around omega-3 in pregnancy, preterm birth, maternal nutrition and baby's brain health, because it's so complementary to Professor Michael Crawford's work, who we're celebrating today, and it connects beautifully with his lifelong message. If we want to protect the child, then we must protect the mother. So Alex, welcome. I would love to ask you how Michael's work has influenced this campaign.
Hugely.
Yeah.
It has been such a pleasure to listen to just a fraction of the things that led Michael to do what he's been doing. Now, I first met you, Michael, in 2001 when I put together a fatty acids in developmental, conditions workshop. But upstream, before the child is even born, I love the way, Michael, that you make clear what people don't know. And if they don't know, they're not going to act on it. 70% of the brain cells you will ever have in your lifetime are made before you're born. The nutrition of the mother, both during pregnancy, but even before conception, is going to influence how that unborn baby from conception. So we so need to do something, and thank you, Simon, for explaining so well the preterm birth. We have the evidence now. We've had it for years. Omega-3 reduce preterm birth. And as you explained, Simon, the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials, they showed long ago that giving omega-3 supplements will reduce preterm birth. It'll reduce early preterm birth by as much as half, is what the most recent trials have shown. This is still not being put into practice.
Yeah.
And again, where do we get these long-chain omega-3? Short-chain don't do it. From fish and seafood and, as I know, Michael, your research has been flagging for decades how important this is, that something needs to be done about it. And if babies are born preterm, how can we minimise the chances, with what we feed them, of retinopathy of prematurity, the commonest cause of lifelong blindness or visual impairment? The evidence has been there for decades, and Michael, you've been publishing it for decades, and they still aren't doing it. Can we add long-chain omega-3 and long-chain omega-6 to the formula given to preterm infants at high risk of blindness and other things that are less easy to measure? You can halve the rates of blindness from being born early preterm. If people would do what you, Michael, were publishing papers on this more than 20 years ago. So I hope that explains how Michael's work has influenced mine. I became interested in ADHD, dyslexia and these conditions through teaching. I come from a background of teachers. And I did that was what took me into research.
Yeah.
And the first research I was doing, it didn't officially have anything to do with nutrition, but these fatty acids, as you said earlier, Rachel, when talking with Michael, there is nothing these fats don't do. And the regulatory substances, but it was vision and looking at visual symptoms, which, yes, they do contribute to dyslexic difficulties in reading, but also other aspects of sensory processing. How does our visual system develop? How does our auditory system develop? So we can even work out the very rapid processing of speech sounds. How does the brain get the information it needs? And it was a bit later that I found out about the nutrition. Hang on a minute, but your work again, Michael. Yes, DHA, vision. And as you said, Gene Anderson's work from way back when. A third to a half of your retina should be made of DHA. And then we come to what do people know about this? And Simon, we've known since 2009. DHA is a dietary essential. Yes, we can convert some of the short chain if we're lucky and if we've got the right genetics and all the vitamin and mineral cofactors, but you can't rely on that. So DHA, it's an absolute essential. Why aren't we telling people this? And we're still not. And the message is really quite simple, but the upstream, you see, of what is my main specialist area is still the ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and the autism spectrum now. But it's never too late. And that's a message, I think, because we don't want mums feeling guilty because they didn't come along. But we do need them to have more information of what they could do, even before. And, how late is it? Some people are never diagnosed, throughout their lifetimes with conditions that are essentially individual differences. But it really is the case. Some people's brains need more than others for myriad reasons, just as you said, Simon, about the ApoE4 and dementia. Look, ApoE4 gene is a risk factor. And as you say, what's it to do with? Lipid metabolism. So, Michael, you have been so ahead of. Well, you mentioned Hugh Sinclair as well. I did my PhD with John Stein, who was doing a visual, and he, of course, was treated like a maverick. Vision has nothing to do with dyslexia, said the people who knew nothing and had their own, But he was at Magdalen College with Hugh Sinclair. And the story of the cod liver oil, exactly.
And
Hugh Sinclair.
Exactly,
this is it. The pioneers, you see. Hugh Sinclair, as a young man, he'd seen the devastation caused by the imposed starvation in the Netherlands by the Nazi regime. If you were pregnant at that time, and there have been amazing research studies done that have absolutely nailed how important nutrition is before the child is born, and even at what stage in pregnancy. But he was able, Hugh Sinclair, as a young medic. He'd also worked in the East End and the slum clearances and the malnutrition and poverty and disadvantage there. But he persuaded the post-war government of the cod liver oil, the orange juice that you mentioned, Michael. This is it. And milk, So we've got to get back to recognising that food is not just some fashion item and some optional extra. And what passes for food, edible food-like substances produced by the multinational corporations who've been buying and lobbying and pressurising, etc., and fund most of the research. Margarine never was healthier than butter, and I don't care what kind it is. So getting some of these simple messages across to people, and particularly raising awareness, whether it's grandparents, who might be thinking, hang on, and should I be interfering now that, my children are having... Yes, learn something about this, pass on the messages that real food beats synthetic chemical construction. Although, Simon, you made clear as well, and so did you, Mark, fish, you see, is a package. It's not just the omega-3. Other key brain nutrients, iodine, which is only found in the marine food chain, although we're the only developed country that has no public health policy on iodine. This is shocking. If you eat fish and seafood, you'll be getting the iodine. The only other main food group, which has become the main source, milk and dairy. But when you look at the superficial foods to avoid in pregnancy, this just made me feel we have to do something about this. On your mobile phone, and there are 4 little buttons as you look at foods to avoid in pregnancy. Fish and seafood, milk and dairy, eggs and meat. And I thought then, are they telling you, be an ultra-processed vegan? What is going on here? If you look at the small print and the detail, but I was shocked and horrified. Again, not being, somebody who, I was looking this up while preparing, a contribution to the first 1,000 days report where, MPs in Parliament trying to get something done to improve knowledge. But I was just shocked and horrified. Where do you get both omega-3 DHA and long-chain omega-6 arachidonic acid? Animal foods, not plant foods. And yet, young women and girls don't know this.
Yeah.
And also the vegan-vegetarian thing, you see, as all of you know, there are vegan sources, but you have to take them as supplements or fortified foods of the long-chain ready-made. So you can get algal sources of DHA. It's what's used in the infant formula. Good. So that's acceptable. But people aren't told how important this is. So I am horrified at how many girls and young women, and it may be because they've got depression, anxiety, whatever, and so on, that they've got in touch with Fab or me. Because some of my early research as well was the first case studies of omega-3 for depression, omega-3 for schizophrenia, that controlled trials have subsequently shown. And Simon, you have, pioneered some of the best reviews of. EPA is the omega-3 that matters for reducing symptoms of depression. But nobody has told them that their diet might make a difference.
Yeah.
And nobody is still, it isn't in the treatment guidelines, but we need to get this out there. So Fab Research, the charity I founded, just after I met you, Michael, I knew there was time for another charity than just the Dyslexia Research Trust with John Stein that I founded that was focusing on vision and supporting the clinic there. So Food and Behaviour Research, the charity. And Michael, thank you so much. Now, I know it'll have been and gone, but we keep our webinars online. You'll still be able, like this podcast. So Michael, I really am looking forward to you joining us in 2 days' time, when we've got an expert from the US who knows all about the dietary guidelines of fish and seafood in pregnancy and how they never were evidence-based of putting a limit on things, and they need changing. So you're going to be joining us, Michael, for the question and answer discussion and try to get some of this evidence out there. Long answer to your first question, but as I say, Michael's work is pioneering. People have got to start listening. And it's about the nutrition of the mother in particular. Nutrition of fathers matters too. Yeah. We need to do something about this.
Absolutely. I think your campaign raises a really important question. How can we assess omega-3 status more routinely in pregnancy, for example, and perhaps some simple primary care questions by a nurse?
It's exactly that. All the experts involved in all of the work for preterm, we get to 2024. They absolutely, and they teamed up with medical and community, and how can we put it into practice? They published a paper in which you can just use a simple checklist questionnaire.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's really just asking, how much fish and seafood does mom eat? So you don't even need the more expensive, more difficult blood tests that they're using in Australia, as you know, Simon, when the Australian government, who did finance some of the trials, well done, are trying to get some of this put into practice. But even just asking a few simple questions, and I'm not joking, if you just ask, do you eat fish and seafood? And how many times a week?
Yes.
And if they say no, you could have a little chat with them about how this is the main source in one package of critical brain nutrients.
Yeah.
But it isn't just the long-chain omega-3, it's also the iodine, it is the selenium.
Yeah.
And because of that, please, will you stop mentioning mercury? Because the only reason mercury might be harmful to the brain, methyl mercury, and there might be some in some species of fish, is because it locks up selenium, induces selenium deficiency. But ocean fish and seafood are so rich in selenium. There's never been any evidence that eating fish and seafood, even to 15 or 20 times what any British person would eat, has ever done any harm, quite the opposite, to the developing brain.
Absolutely. So, Alex, what would you say to policymakers, midwives, GPs? I know the charity Nutri Tank, led by Ali Jaffe, is doing some incredible work, having recognised that most GPs only receive about 2 hours training in nutrition as medical students during their medical degree. So if to any of those listeners now who I've mentioned in these categories, what would you say to them?
Well, we need the public health policy, we need dietary guidelines to change.
Yeah.
But forgive me if I'm getting a little impatient now, and Michael, you are just amazing, and how patient you have been. You warned in your first book in 1972 about the modern diet and what it was doing to brains. The reviewer of that book for, I think it was the Times, if this man is right, we shall become a race of morons. And the standard American diet and you predicted the mental health crisis decades before everyone else caught up, and it's been upon us for a while now. But we need to work faster than these, show us the evidence, do the round. We need to get the message out more broadly about how important, and the lifestyle medicine, as you say. We had a recent webinar, we are working, Fab Research is working now with the people like the British Association, lifestyle medicine, functional medicine. But the guidelines, I don't know, we're going to keep doing what we can to try to. But they are so, it seems, reluctant to see the bigger picture. Simon, you know as well. We need more trials where we control for this. We need more trials. We always need more research, but we've got enough evidence already. For those who know where to look, like you, Michael, we had enough evidence back in the 1970s. That was 50-something years ago. How much more we have not just a mental health crisis, the special needs.
Yeah.
You see, I knew very early on, hang on, we take a little case history in our dyslexia, research clinic, preterm birth or, health of mother and other signs which, hang on, long before any diagnosis, if you're lucky enough to get one, these are the rates of preterm birth in conditions like dyspraxia, ADHD, again, it's going to raise the risk of, more severe forms of what are actually individual differences. Do you know what I mean? Some of the features of these conditions can be advantageous, as you know well, Rachel, they're not disorders, diseases, but special educational needs and so on, and the nutrition in schools.
And I'm going to be bringing in shortly Dr. Kevin Wrigley to talk to us about that topic exactly. But I want to pause and to bring this back to the listener. So today's episode is about the future of brain health. The message today is not about blame, it's about support, prevention and possibility. Are we giving mothers, babies, children, young people, adults the biological, emotional, nutritional and social foundations they need for healthier brains? And at Nutritious Minds, this is exactly the kind of conversation we want to create, one that brings science, compassion and real world change together. So this is a question for everyone. What is the one thing the public most needs to understand about the future of brain health? So let's start with you, Michael. Are we facing a preventable brain health crisis?
Of course it's preventable.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question about that. And it's preventable, as both Simon and Alex have been talked about, through good nutrition, and good nutrition has to depend to a large extent on the use of the marine food web as well as the land-based stuff. But, and I would have thought the simple message is that if we don't start doing something about it now, you can write off humanity.
And maybe that's happening with AI already.
Well,
AI is just a tiny part of it.
Alex mentioned, 1972, Graham Rose reviewing our book, writing in the Sunday Times that unless we do something about the brain, we'll become a race of morons.
That's right, and indeed.
That's published in the Sunday Times.
Absolutely.
1972.
Yeah.
And they're still struggling to get something done.
Yeah. And
so there's some kind of resistance to actually implementing what we all know as scientists, and what the whole bunch of the like scientists got together in 2008 and WHO and FAO saying that the evidence is at the highest level of confidence. You can't get any higher than that. You can't get better.
Yeah. Simon, what are your thoughts?
So when we were developing these resources for donors, the milk banks were very concerned that people didn't think if we don't do everything right, our milk is worthless. And it's about support, encouragement. I think fundamentally people know that a bag of crisps is bad, fish is good. But it's making small changes make a difference. It's do what you can as much as you can without fixating, without worrying, so without blame, within your financial constraints, within your what your family food is, what society your ethnicity, etc. So make the small changes, try and be aware of the importance of it. I think that's the thing, is people think that food, if I eat too much food, I get fat. That's it. That's all it is. Calories in, calories out. It's identifying nutrients have a fundamental role in brain health.
Absolutely.
And that's it. Bottom line is that your brain is determined by the nutrients you put into it. How it works is determined by the nutrients you put in. It is fundamentally important.
Yes.
And that's it. So do what you can and appreciate the importance of it. If you don't care, that's one thing. But if you care and are confused, keep the message simple. Eat more, more fish, more variety, more colours on the plate, etc., etc. Do what you can.
Yeah, we need to build our brain health resilience, and nutrition is the armour. It can be protective, for sure. Alex, what are your thoughts?
Just going to echo what the other two have just said. We do just need, you see, this is it. But I think for those who can't afford or who are living in food deserts and so on, if any policymakers, and when I say policymaker, if you buy the food or if you're the head of the school or if you run the charity church kitchens, the
food banks,
exactly, the food banks, and donating to the food banks.
Yeah, so important.
In my case, it's always going to be because, yes, the lowest cost, you talked about the farmed salmon and, you know, whatever, but the lowest cost tinned fish, the sardines, the pilchards, the anchovies, this, and recipes as well.
Yes.
That will help too for any ethnic, sort of diets, culture. Most traditional, all traditional diets, pre-industrial, provided the nutrients needed for, well, fertility in the first place, healthy, sort of pregnancy, childbirth, and lifelong. But even if we come to things like dementia, again, the evidence does show that things like choline, we haven't mentioned that one, is another nutrient that's important. And deficiencies, again, in early life actually might raise your risk much later on. We cannot show those things with randomised, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. You can't randomise pregnant women and follow up the children when they're 60, 65 and see, it can't be done. So I'm tired of the policy-making bodies insisting that they can't do anything because it's not an RCT, as you call them. It's not a randomised controlled trial.
As Professor John Stein always told me, you wouldn't do an RCT of a parachute.
Exactly.
And nutritional research is incredibly complex. Isolating specific nutrients, with an idea that it's going to make this hugely significant difference in your life is way too simplistic. So, and also nutritional research is so hard to get funding for.
Exactly.
It really is. So there's, it's more nuanced, as Simon says. Yeah.